Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
On today's program, we'll be interviewing the independent candidate for Idaho's first district of the U.S. House of Representatives race. Our guest is Dave Olson. He's from St. Mary's, Idaho. And as I've indicated, he's an independent candidate for the U.S. congressional seat in the November election. Our guest holds a political science and criminal justice degree from the University of Idaho. And last year, he obtained in our professional technical program at North Idaho College an automotive program. Welcome, Mr. Olson, to our program.
Thank you very much.
And I'm also very pleased to have our regular panelist, Erna Reinhardt, who's Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College. And Mr. Olson, like the other candidates, will be asking you 10 questions, and it is my privilege to ask the first question. Following the 9/11 terrible crime in New York and in Washington, D.C., as we were victimized by that crime, the President of the United States and the Congress declared war on terrorists around the world. The first action was to go into Afghanistan and to overthrow the Taliban government that had provided a haven for Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. In your opinion, after the overthrow of the Taliban government in Afghanistan, have we given sufficient attention to Afghanistan, including capturing Osama bin Laden and dealing with the resurgence of the Taliban in that country?
Well, I believe we have looked at a lot of possibilities on it. We have used a lot of Northern Alliance people to try to block Osama bin Laden's escape. Some of them perhaps did not work as well as they should have. It would have maybe been better if we would have had more of our people on the peripheral of Afghanistan to block any of the Taliban or any of the al-Qaeda operatives leaving the country. They have since moved into Pakistan, and Pakistan has assisted us with the war on terrorism. But recently they too have signed a truce agreement for part of their northwest tier of their country and some of their tribal areas, which may make it difficult for us to capture Osama bin Laden, and it could possibly provide a new base of operation for him, which is something that we'd have to look very carefully at.
Thank you. Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to the show, Mr. Olson. It's great to have you here. Our second question is about the war on Iraq, and it's a two-part question. The first part is, did you support the invasion of Iraq? And the second part is, now that we're there, what do you propose that we should do to stop the sectarian violence, stabilize the country, and avoid civil war?
Well, in the beginning, we went in for a variety of reasons. First, it was weapons of mass destruction. Then it was regime change, and then it was to bring them democracy. I think the story changed so many times that the average American is not real sure why we went into Iraq. I've got 22 years of military experience. I'm a retired Air Force, and I don't fully understand why we went into Iraq on this war of terrorism. Saddam Hussein was basically contained. We had no-fly zones both in the north and the south. And I don't fully understand why we went in there. Now that we're in there, there's been a huge change over to where we've progressed from toppling the regime to having to contend with the various sectarian violence movements between the Sunni and the Shiites in particular. I believe it is gradually degrading into a civil war. And I think that if we're going to bring democracy to Iraq and give them a chance to establish their government and to reestablish their military forces and security forces, that we have basically done that. I would recommend that we begin a progressive withdrawal at various stages. Eventually, you give somebody democracy or freedom to act, eventually you're going to have to take your hands off and step back. That doesn't mean that they're going to form a government that we will approve of. They may have foreign policies that are contrary to ours. But again, the Iraqi people are going to have to sit down and figure out a way to live with each other and solve their own problems. And we're not going to be able to do that, I think, by trying to stand between them and hold them apart. Eventually, it's going to have to come to them operating their own government within their own land. So I would support a progressive withdrawal as their forces come online, and I think we should make every effort to get out as soon as possible.
Thank you.
All of our foreign policy questions are about the Middle East. We recognize there are other places in the world, and there's South America and Asia and Africa and all, but this seems to be where the real hotspots are. And our third question, Mr. Olson's in the same geographical area. What recommendations do you have to settle the dispute in the Middle East between Israel and her neighbors? First of all is the Palestinian question, and secondly, what would you also recommend how we should address the recent conflict between Israel and forces in South Lebanon?
Well, that is an extremely complicated question, and I don't think I have a magic answer for it. The Palestinians have been given an opportunity to establish their own territories and their own country, but again, it's going to come down to they're going to have to live with their neighbors. There's no other way to get around it. In Lebanon, where you've got Hezbollah controlling a huge part of the southern part of Lebanon, and the Lebanese forces not being powerful enough to go in and actually disarm or incorporate them into their military forces. Again, it may require international forces, either under the UN or NATO combined forces, to go in and to establish or stabilize the situation and build up the Lebanese army to where they can actually come in and control their own area and make the rules of their government or whatever foreign policy their government establishes to really stick to be able to live with Israel. The people have been at war with each other for such a long time that it is, once again, no easy solution. There is no magic bullet for it. We can be a peacemaker, and we can encourage them to try to get together and give them an opportunity or a neutral zone where they can meet, be it in the UN or in a NATO country, or even at Camp David when some of our presidents had both the Palestinians and the Israeli leadership together to where they could negotiate without having rockets lobbed in on each other. And it's going to come down to the people who are going to have to settle their differences and be willing to give and take to get to a level to where they each can live with the solution. It can't be imposed from outside.
Thank you. Reinhardt.
The rest of our questions are about domestic policy, and the first one is about immigration. Immigration is one of our most hotly debated issues today. What would your proposals be for addressing this issue? And if you became a member of Congress, what immigration reform policies would you recommend, including how to secure our borders?
Okay, this brings me to something that is maybe dear to my heart. It's one of my second goals, and I've had 3 established in my campaign. My second one is to get firm control over the border. Before we can do anything, we have to get control over the border. Right now we've got a situation that is completely out of hand. It's chaotic. You got people that live on the border area that are having to carry assault rifles in their yards and barricade themselves in their homes at night. I would say that we have to secure the borders regardless of how unpopular it might be. If it requires fences or walls, then those need to be erected. If we need to put National Guard down there to back up our Border Patrol, then we need to do that too. I know there's been a great dispute as to the Minutemen that have gone down on the border. I think the Minutemen could be an invaluable resource to both the Border Patrol and securing the border. Years ago, when the bank got robbed, the sheriff would go out, form up some of the town folks and deputize them, and form a posse and go after the criminals. If we have to deputize the Minutemen and put them in non-critical positions, such as building the walls, building the fences, putting them in lookout towers, driving buses or typing reports or translating in the processing centers, all those are non-critical positions where they do not have to be armed. So we could have an unarmed backup force to the Border Patrol. You could then take the Border Patrolmen that are manning those positions presently, put them in the field. This would reorganize and reutilize your manpower, and it would cost us literally nothing because the Minutemen have gone down there to volunteer on their own dime, paid their own way down there. They're sitting in their own pickup trucks. And if they want to volunteer to build fences, then I say let's use them to the maximum capability. If it means deputizing them, then I think the legal precedences have been well established. It's in a well-recognized program that would work, and we should do whatever is required to secure our borders.
Next question has to do with the economy of the United States, and certainly it's another very major issue. For a number of years, we have witnessed a growing deficit, which has led to a large national debt, an annual deficit that's added to the national debt. Because of this soaring national debt, we're now forced to borrow large amounts of money from other countries, such as China and Japan and South Korea, in addition to the money we borrow here at home. What would you do to address this national debt?
Well, this is my third goal, is reducing the national debt. We've got a national debt that's pushing upwards to $9 trillion. That's over $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. That is an astronomical number. People, you ask them how much it is, and they can't even visualize it. I think there's a lot of areas in our government where we have just outright waste. An example of that would be when they went into New Orleans after the hurricane. They moved people out to all different cities in the country. They moved them out to the Houston Astrodome, and then they simply turned around and handed them credit cards with $2,000 apiece on them as free money. And then they wondered why the people were buying tattoos and mag wheels for their cars and spending it for everything but what the government intended it to be spent on, which was reestablishing the people. That money has literally just been wasted, and it runs into the tens of millions. Bridges in Alaska that don't seem to go anywhere. Again, waste within the government. One of my proposals, and I've had people ask me, well, how would you go about reducing it? I said, and I've told people publicly this, I think that in a year when we have deficit spending, it should be illegal for the Congress to vote themselves a pay raise in the first year. We should freeze their salary. In the second year that we have deficit spending, we should cut their salary 10% of all elected and appointed officials. And I've had people look at me and go, well, I'm not sure if that's legal. Well, when corporate America can go to their employees and say, take a cut in salary so we can stay competitive, when they can go to their employees and say, take a cut in benefits so we can stay competitive, when corporations can go to court and dump their contracts that they've signed with their pensioners or employees so that they can stay competitive. If it's good enough for corporate America, I believe it's good enough for political America. And maybe that's the sharp stick we need in the elected and appointed officials' sides in order to get them to be more frugal and conservative in their spending habits. If they won't control it, maybe we should.
Mr. Olson, due to our dependence on foreign oil that's resulted in escalating energy and gas prices, what do you think are some solutions to this problem? And do you have any recommendations for alternative sources of energy?
You guys have brought me right back to my very first goal.
Now.
I got all three of them. I'm amazed. Yeah, I think our country should go into a 10-year program of doing research in alternative fuels. Now, I've had people talk to me about biodiesel and ethanol, and they may have a limited basis, but the question that I have is if you're going to begin using wheat or corn for ethanol, which are both food products, foodstuffs, or if you're going to use granola or sawgrass or whatever for your biodiesels, can we grow enough in this country to supply this country's needs? I have real serious questions about whether or not we want to use foodstuffs or whether or not we can grow enough. I prefer looking at hydrogen as a fuel source. Iceland has begun a program to convert to hydrogen fuels for their vehicles. Germany and Dubai have done a feasibility study. They estimate that approximately 14 years in the year 2020, 14 years from now, that a third of the world's automobiles are going to be run on some form of hydrogen fuel. China's coming on heavy with a booming economy, and their young entrepreneurs and businessmen no longer want to be riding bicycles. They want to be in cars like the rest of the world. So I think in the next 20 years, China is going to be coming on in the automotive area very heavily. They are also looking at alternative fuels. Hydrogen can be gotten from water, and we have an ocean on each side of us, and I don't envision us being able to pump the Pacific Ocean dry. If it means desalination plants and then distilling the hydrogen out of the water, those are all established technologies which could readily be put online. I would do it in a 10-year stretch so that it would not be too disruptive to the economy. And I think the way to pay for it would be to sell an energy bond, where if someone invested $100 today in America's future, that when they cash that bond in at 10 years, we could make it tax-free, and whatever money they got back from it would become a stimulus package for the economy at the other end. This would benefit people who had young children starting school at 8 years old. When they graduated high school at 18 and were ready for college, their bonds would come due every month, and it would give them a readily available college fund. Once again, let's make it tax-free. There's 100 million people working in this country. If 1% of them, that's 1 million people, were to buy a bond a month, that's $100 million a month you could put into building the infrastructure. And you must have infrastructure before you can have product. I can give you a hydrogen burning car today, but if you can't get fuel for it, you can't drive it. It's just that simple. So I would look very much at liquid hydrogen, use a fuel injected system, avoid the fuel cell, avoid the batteries. Germany's got several cars out now, which they're doing it. The BMW's new 750 Auto is going to be a dual fuel. So I think it's readily available, and it will be the future fuel for the next 100 years.
Now we'll move to the field of education on the next question. We've had a lot of issues in this in recent years about the role of the national government in education. What do you perceive to be the role of the federal government in public education as illustrated by the most recent national program, the No Child Left Behind program?
Well, education and family are probably the two main cornerstones of any well-educated society. Any society that is technically advanced will also have education as one of its primary cornerstones. With the No Child Left Behind, the biggest problem that I see with that is the fact that in many cases it's unfunded, or it's been turned back to the local communities to try to find a way to fund it. If we're going to have federal mandates, then we ought to have federal funding for it. I think that every effort should be made to increase the education in this country. Certain industries, I believe, should be targeted by the government, for example, alternative fuels. And perhaps Pell Grants or student loans could be given to encourage students and young people to go into those fields as an example of supporting education, which would be long-term jobs, long-term training. And I think that if we do that, we can make education available to the young people of this country who are going to be our future leaders. And even though we make it available, does not guarantee everybody's going to take advantage of it. You can make all kinds of opportunities available for people, and you will still have people that will be left behind or will fail simply because they're too lazy to take advantage of it.
We need to move on to the next question
Okay.
now. Erna Reinhardt has the next question.
Okay.
Based on recent revelations that some powerful lobbyists have engaged in illegal activity that has resulted in criminal prosecutions, what should Congress do to control or regulate the influence of lobbyists?
Lobbyists are probably one of the biggest dangers and influences that we have in this country. You can't pick up your morning paper or turn on your TV that one party or the other is not being indicted, and it's usually for bribery or money laundering or some other type of taking yachts. And this doesn't matter if it's a Republican candidate, Republican side of the House or the Democratic side of the House. I think we have such corruption in our government that's tolerated, not only by the American people, but by members, for example, in ethics committees, who are supposed to be policing their own people. They have let it slide and said, well, you know, it's only pushing the envelope of the law, it's only tweaking the law, it's only splitting hairs. There needs to be a complete cleaning from top to bottom of our political leadership and structures. If this means electing third parties or independent candidates to do it, then we need to do it. But whenever somebody picks up their paper and they find that someone has gone to prison or has pleaded guilty to bribery and money laundering, and they draw 27 months at cutting grass, people say, well, gee, he took millions, that's pretty good wages. Or we see elected officials who crash their cars into police barricades at 3 o'clock in the morning, as Patrick Kennedy did, and the police give him a ride home. It gives the American people the impression that, well, the laws are not equally enforced. There are some people that seem to be above the law. And this really is detrimental to our entire nation, simply because people lose faith in the way the government and political system works. That's why lobbyists and that's why corruption has to be dealt with immediately and severely, if that's what it takes.
Thank you.
Our next question is, these questions are very complex and we only get 2 or 3 minutes on each one. I know that's a challenge, but one of the great concerns of America is the escalating cost of health care. That also includes between 40 and 45 million Americans without any health care coverage. What solutions would you propose for solving this critical issue?
That is probably one of the hardest things to come up with. I know many people have suggested that we allow for the reimportation of American-made drugs from, say, Canada or from other countries. I know Bill Sally has said that, well, there shouldn't be any reimportation of it. There's too much of a danger of getting counterfeit drugs. I think that individuals who want to use generic drugs or want to purchase drugs from abroad should have that available option. Otherwise, it locks people into only using drugs made in this country, and it creates an unfair monopoly for the pharmaceutical industry. If we can look at purchasing drugs in larger quantities, say under the Medicare or Medicaid program, to where we can buy in bulk and seek discounts, that may be a possibility. Being a retired guy, I do use my military pension for some of the drugs, anything that I need or medical that I need, so I have a medical program. But I know even within the DOD, they have gone to giving patients pill cutters and then buying pills in a larger dosage and having you cut it in half to meet your requirement. And that provides cost savings. So there are options that we could look at, and it's going to require efforts on everybody's part. And I'll tell you what, a good idea is a good idea no matter where it comes from. If it comes from the public, it's great. If it comes from our elected officials, that's great. And if anyone has an idea on how we can provide medical for everybody, bring it to me and we'll take a serious look at it.
Thank you. Arnold Reinhardt.
Dave, the final question, we have about 3 minutes, is what is your position on the use of federal public lands in the state of Idaho, and do you favor or oppose Congressman Simpson's bill regarding the use of public lands?
I haven't fully studied Congressman Simpson's proposals. I think public lands are just what they say, public lands. They should be available to the public for use, be it hunting, recreation, hiking, camping. If it's an area where we have old growth timber or primitive areas where we want to reintroduce grizzly bears or wolves or wild or game, then we need to preserve those areas as primitive areas. I'm really not in favor of tearing up all the roads in the woods and turning them into primitive areas. I own 45 acres down by St. Mary's, I've had my property timber thinned. And when I had it done, I had the guy go through and selectively take out the bigger trees, making room for the smaller ones and opening it up for sunlight to get in. I reseeded my areas. So I believe in being a good steward of the land. I think the people of Idaho should be able to use their public lands, and that doesn't mean strip mining them, but we should be good stewards of them.
Well, just we've gotten through all the questions, and we want you to do one of the things the other candidates did. In about a minute and a half, would you like to speak to the viewers in Idaho, the voters, of why they should elect you to the Congress?
Well, I've had people ask me what my qualifications were. As I said earlier, I have 22 years in the Air Force. During that time, I worked both transportation and I worked in the nuclear weapons field. So I've dealt with projects that were not only militarily sensitive, but they were politically sensitive because some of them dealt with the treaty negotiations that we had with the old Soviet Union. When I was in service, I managed multi-million-dollar accounts that I was personally assigned for, and I made it a habit of trying to be frugal with the taxpayer's dollar, and in many cases I was very successful at it. It didn't always make people happy that I was, but it did work. Because of that, I've seen government at its best, I've seen government at its worst, and I've seen government with all its little idiosyncrasies. I think that gives me a in-depth knowledge of how government functions on probably some of the most basic areas, and it doesn't matter whether it's a DOD program or some other department. Government is government.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Mr. Dave Olson, the independent candidate for the U.S. 1st District in Idaho to the U.S. House of Representatives. It's an open seat, and he is one of the candidates for that. Mr. Olson, thank you for giving us this time in our studio.
Thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Erna, for your questions always. And ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you'll be with us again next week at the same time when we will discuss yet another subject. And until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.